Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Welcome back to Houselights, our director discussion show here on the Nerd Party Network. Often we travel through different director houses for a decade or two, like the 80s or 90s, but this week we are starting the wing of Bond. 3 directors, 5 Bonds in 6 films, starting with 1964's Goldfinger, directed by Guy Hamilton. I'm Darren Moser, and I'm joined again by my friend Silverfinger, Tristan Riddell, and head of the LMNOP branch, John Mills. So I'm excited to enter this new wing of Bond. What we're going to do is look at the iconic character of James Bond. But one of the most interesting things about that is that it was a franchise where it was played by multiple people. For this wing, we're going to compare 3 directors with 2 Bond films each. So first up is Guy Hamilton, who directed Goldfinger in 1964 with Sean Connery, and then Man with the Golden Gun in 1974 with Roger Moore. So we're going to be comparing films, directors, Bonds, gadgets, cars. It's going to be an exciting time, guys.
I am thoroughly excited. I think when you pitched this, I was immediately enamored by the concept because, 3 directors, each directing a different actor portraying the same character. It's similar to what we did with Hannibal, with the Wing of Hannibal, where that we had multiple directors, multiple movies, but one character and 2 actors who played that character. And this just makes perfect sense to fall into this in this niche for our director-based podcast of Houselights, and I cannot wait. And Goldfinger especially, what a way to kick this segment off than with Goldfinger.
Blah, blah, blah. I got to get it out. Otherwise, I'm going to say
the
it
music,
after
man.
every time you say Goldfinger. It's going to be a fun time. Are you excited, John, to talk about Bond? Is Bond a thing for you?
Okay, this is where I give a shameless plug to another Nerd Party host, Sean Eastridge, who turned me into a Bond fan by giving me 4 Bond movies. And they included, of course, Goldfinger. And he said, Goldfinger is the one. If you enjoy Goldfinger, you're going to keep going with everything. Because he gave me Dr. No, he gave me From Russia with Love, he gave me Goldfinger, he gave me The Spy Who Loved Me. And he said, if you watch these 4 in sequence and you're hooked on Goldfinger, you will watch the rest of them. And I can't wait to talk about it because I am a Bond fan. And I have seen all of the Bond films at this point, even Die Another Day, which no person on earth should ever actually see.
Well, yes, this isn't a cumulative list of Bond. We're not ranking the Bonds, but like Tristan said, it's going to be really interesting. This is... With this wing, it's kind of a 1-2 punch for each director because we first have to kind of dive into, well, what is a Guy Hamilton Bond movie like? And then next week, it's going to be really interesting to contrast that not only with a different Bond, but 10 years later. So he's going to have grown as a director, maybe added a little lens flare. Who knows? It might be a completely different kind of thing. But I loved what you said, John, about Goldfinger being like the starting point. Because while it's not the first Bond film, it's the 3rd. It was the first blockbuster Bond film. It really cemented like, hey, we can make as many of these as we want and people will keep coming. I often try to pull up stats or look at different movies. And this movie was made again in 1964 for a budget of $3 million, which at the time was the combined cost of the previous 2 films. So a huge amount of money back then. It grossed 125 million US, but calculating 1964 to 2002 dollars. Okay, Kristen, what do you guess that is in $22?
$630 million.
Up.
I'm going to say, given the way inflation has gone over the last 3 years, I'm going to peg it at $800 million. Up?
According to the website I checked, which was the inflation calculator, $1.2 billion. This movie broke the block. Yeah, we could see why they're like, you know what? Let's just keep doing this over and over.
I do know that this movie made records when it first came out, that it was the fastest grossing film of its time.
That's right.
And it earned $3 million, its shooting budget, in 2 weeks.
That's insane. And again, we throw around 3 million like it's nothing, but again, 1964, Bruce Wayne was still a millionaire in 1964. He wasn't a billionaire yet. We hadn't scaled up inflation.
It just makes me think of that famous Yogi Berra statement, "A nickel ain't worth a dime anymore." Because, when you always do those sorts of comparisons, you think to yourself, man, no wonder people say, oh, back in 1934, bread cost a nickel. I'm like, yeah, obviously a nickel was more valuable back then. So,
right.
But to be worth that kind of money, yeah. I mean, no wonder Goldfinger winds up becoming basically the template for every Bond film afterward. They found the magic recipe right here. That is stunning.
And without DVD sales to help bolster it too.
Right.
There's
no home video.
No home video. Now, it probably stayed in theater longer because that's just how it was back then. But now I won't ask either of you if you saw it opening day, because I know that neither of us were alive.
Even I'm not that old, Darren. Come on.
Okay, it was only 58 years ago. I'm just saying. But yeah, so let's talk a bit about the formula, because we know we've talked about how this became the template, and you start off with the opening that's not really attached to the main story, but it drops you right into the action, which is a great narrative trope. You have the mission then is laid out where you get the debriefing from M, and you get geared up with Q, I feel like this is where the gadgets are new, but they're not quite full on corny yet. Like they're still really interesting. It's like, it's mostly in his car, and it's like and he uses most of them. And then you have the Bond girl, you have the car chase, you have the peril. And then at the end, Bond gets the girl and doesn't get found by the people looking for him, and rinse and repeat. You have a Bond movie.
Well, I think also an important thing to point out is that you have for lack of a better term, the comic book implications of the ending of the villain's goal. You go back to something like From Russia with Love, that's very much in the Cold War, that's very much pulling on the tensions, that's very much more serious. Whereas for the common person, irradiating all of the gold is a very abstract sort of thing.
That's a super villain thing that they're going to do. Yeah,
exactly. That's like a Lex Luthor in 1978 Superman sort of thing, where it's like, I'm going to break off California. It's so abstract that you're like, okay, I'm just going to go along for the ride.
But they play it so straight, and they even point it out. I mean, Bond even asks him, he's like, so you have like 2 weeks of free time to move the gold out of Fort Knox because it's so heavy. And he's like, no, I'm just going to, he's like, put it together, Mr. Bond. And it's like, it's still a crazy plan, but it's not that bad.
In the book, it was originally, they just take it out.
But like they just hand wave and they just do.
Yeah, they just hand wave, and like that's what he said his plan was going to be. He's like, no, we'll just take it out in trucks, that kind of thing.
I'm glad
and
somebody
Guy
was
Hamilton
like,
was the one who came up with the idea to irradiate it, and that's a genius idea.
It is.
I love it in the movie when Bond hears it, and you can truly see that he's impressed. He's just like, wow. He's like, that's such a great idea.
Right. It's diabolical. But what's really interesting is rewatching it this time, because we did House of McTiernan, is thinking in terms of Die Hard with a Vengeance. This is essentially the same-ish plan that is happening with Die Hard with a Vengeance, with the misdirection, and then in the book version, taking the stuff out. They're not irradiating it, but they are convincing the world that the gold no longer exists to make their gold worth more money when they resell it on the market. And so
it's very much Goldfinger isn't trying to win. he's trying to make the rest of the gold market lose.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
And
thus
what's
he wins.
interesting is if Goldfinger actually won and James Bond lost, it would just now this year stop being irradiated.
Oh, we can go
That's
back.
a long
We can
time.
go in. That's true. Although something tells me their prediction, like we were still kind of back of the napkin math, knowing about atomic theory. So I don't know how accurate that is. It seemed like a very short amount of time, but no, you're absolutely right. Well, that's why we picked it this year.
Exactly.
We totally
Yeah.
knew that. I totally put that together.
Totally did that on purpose.
But yeah, so let's start with the story. I love this cold open. It so sets the tone, and it is something that creates tropes you see later. I mean, we see in True Lies where the whole get out of the wetsuit and you have the tux on underneath and it's perfectly dry.
Yeah, and there's not a single wrinkle.
No, not a single wrinkle. And although I have to think it's it's not odd. It's just funny. The hidden base inside the fuel tank with the secret door. And I'm like, who else uses this door? Like right? Is it just for the secret agents to pop in? But it's a
great intro because like what you talked about, like you have the duck on his head. And,
right.
And like that's goofy, but yet, it's smart at the same time.
It's camouflage. It's not a terrible idea.
Takes off the wetsuit, goes into the bar. He's wearing a white tux or a white suit. And, when he detonates it, like he has the cigarette in his mouth and he's just kind of looking around like, oh, what's going on? He has that incredulous look on his face. Which is technically
the most suspicious thing you could do in that moment, to be the one person in that room that is not shocked by the explosion outside.
Yeah.
But it is such a Bond thing to do.
Yeah.
And I think that's what this whole opening really, really solidifies Bond as a character. Like it really tells you who he is, for better or worse, the type of person he is.
Yeah.
And that's the interesting thing is Goldfinger, I think, embraces the idea that they can't go as dark as the book series goes. I think what a lot of people lose with the book series is that Fleming is not presenting a good person. He's not presenting a charming person. Bond's drinking habit has to do with the fact that it's the only way that he can sleep at night because the screams are so terrible in his brain that he needs to make them stop somehow. And I think that what it is we see the road start being paved toward more with this embrace of the idea that it's very important to convey that even in these tense situations, Bond is very droll and he's very cool in everything. So while it is a reaction for him not to react to the explosion, it conveys to the audience that no matter what the situation is, Bond's blood pressure will never rise, which, as we know from Hannibal, means he's a sociopath. But in terms of the audience, it immediately signals you're going to have fun. It's okay. This is escapism. And Bond is that super cool character that you wish you could be in a panic situation. Right now, as we all prepare for a hurricane to hit where I'm living, there's not a lot of calm in the area sort of thing. And it's like, there are those of us, though, that are striving to be a little bit more Bond about it and be like, oh, okay, cool. These are the things going on.
It's funny that you bring that up because I was first introduced to Goldfinger as a kid. Like my dad and I, we were at, I think, Best Buy when I was really small, and he found the VHS set of all the Sean Connery Bonds, and he's like, oh, we're gonna get this today, and we're gonna go home and we're gonna watch these. And I'm like, oh, sweet. And like that became our thing. Like we worked our way through the set, starting with the
young old Indiana Jones. No.
And like we started with Dr. No and worked our way all the way through Diamonds Are Forever, and I was just like Bond is linked forever with my dad, and like spending time with my dad in the basement, watching it on watching it on the big screen, and just like loving every single moment of it, like even the crappy Bonds, just like absolutely loving it. And I remember specifically with Goldfinger, because like, watching Dr. No and From Russia with Love, I didn't really dig them that much when I was younger, but Goldfinger was something that I could latch onto as a kid. And the reason why I bring this up with in response to what you were saying about like how we all want to be a little bit like Bond, a little bit cooler and droll and everything, and like less anxiety. Watching Goldfinger today as an adult, and also just thinking about the franchise and thinking what Bond goes through. Like when you're a kid or a 20 something, you're just like, oh yeah, like booze, women, fast cars, gadgets, sounds awesome.
That's what I want.
That's what I want. But then like when you get older, you're like, oh my God, this looks so stressful. Like, like I don't want a laser to give me the worst vasectomy in humankind. Like I don't want to do that. Like it's just like all of it just seems like, why get out of bed? But it's funny how your perspective changes from when you're a kid, a young man, and then an adult.
But I want to hit on that. I think that there are certain aspects. I like that you mentioned watching it with your dad. I didn't. My dad wasn't. My dad liked Bond, but it wasn't really his thing. My dad was Westerns, right? And I think that there is an aspect to Bond that makes us very forgiving of the things that don't age particularly well, because we have a fondness for sort of that nostalgic flashback.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think that one of the things that makes Goldfinger work really, really well that I've never read giving enough credit to, and I'm going to mess up his last name, Gert Fröbe, who played Goldfinger.
I'm going to guess Frobe.
I was going to say, okay, whatever. It's fine. But it's his aplomb while he's in that role, because he's every bit as cool as Bond is. When bad things happen or Bond screws up his plan, he doesn't freak out. He doesn't get angry. And I think this becomes your template for future Bond villains of they're equally as cool. And it's this, it sets the stage for it always to be this chess game of two masters sitting there. I'm going to make this move. I'm going to make that move. But if you get upset, that's when you lose. And so everything is about just being super chill. Because if you go back to just the film before, From Russia with Love, there is real peril and fear, and like Robert Shaw is terrifying in his role. And I mean, I love From Russia with Love, but there's a comic bookiness to Goldfinger that matches Bond's larger than life persona. And I think that then sets the stage for how the future stuff works and makes it. I mean, I think that's the gauntlet that's thrown down, really, is Goldfinger defines the villains from this point forward and how they have to match Bond.
Yeah, you create this villain that's smart. And I love smart villains and they don't have to win. But I mean, he catches Bond a couple of times in this movie. Like when he's on the table, it's Bond's sweet talking that gets him off, but he almost dies right then. Like he literally has nothing he can do. And yeah, Goldfinger, again, he carries out his, I love when Goldfinger puts on the army uniform at the very end. And you're just like, he had already thought of that. He already had thought, because the only reason the army is showing up and foiling your plan is if things are going wrong, but he's already has that contingency in mind.
And to get back to what Tristan was saying earlier with the idea of irradiating the gold coming from the director, it's the director who pulls these things off, who says, okay, this is how we have to stage it. And that's why I think you have to give the director you have to give Guy Hamilton a whole lot of credit for figuring out how to stage these things so that they're both clever and obvious enough that any audience member can get on them. Because how many films do we watch where the director out clevers themselves or becomes so obsessed with the sleight of hand that not every film goer gets on board with it? It sort of undoes Nolan from time to time, where he out clevers himself, where the fans who are looking for it, they know the trick that he's going to pull. But if I sit my wife down to watch it, I have to stop every 25 minutes or so and say, remember this shot. Remember what happens here.
Well, and when Bond is like piecing it together, again, it's a brilliant scene because it shows that Bond is smart, but it also shows, there's a lot of moments that show that Goldfinger is fallible. Like, he's greedy. He loves gold to a fault. But other things, like he still thinks he's one up on Bond, and so much so that he can reveal his plan. And that's become a trope where, of course the villain reveals their plan. But in this movie, it's coming from a place of, I actually believe him as a character feels he's so superior in his intellect that he can do that and still get away with it.
And the one thing that really caught me this watch, and it's been a while since I've seen it, was there's so many times when I'm thinking about a Bond film or I'm watching a Bond film, I'm like, if it kind of brings me back to, that Austin Powers where Seth Green is just like, I have a gun in my room. I will go get it and I will shoot him in the head and then we'll be done with it. He's like, no, I'm just gonna turn my back and just assume that it all went to plan. What? Like, there's so many times, like, it's even when I was watching this, I was just like, oh, if you just killed Bond, like if you just let the laser slice him in half slowly, then you probably would have won. But then I remembered that in the scene when he reveals his plan, and then some of his people come and say, hey, there's two guys in a car, scouting out our location. And then they realize that it's Felix, or not specifically Felix, but that it's CIA or whomever. He's like, okay, well, let's let them see Bond and let them know that he's doing just fine. And I'm just like, holy crap, that's smart. Not only does that justify him keeping Bond alive, he's smart enough to realize when he needs to use him. Right. Because if he did kill Bond, Felix wouldn't have seen him, would have thought something was wrong and then would have called in the cavalry.
Yes. And to go back to what you're saying, don't worry, he would have died of shock pretty quickly into that whole laser thing. That's totally cool.
That doesn't really make me feel too much better.
Oh no, it would have been horrific for however long he held on. That would have been absolutely terrible. But I think that it's also just really in terms of the quote unquote complexity of things. It's a playful sort of complexity. It's an acknowledging. It's something that I think is the best of these escapist sorts of things. You're in on the gag, and it knows you're in on the gag. And it's not trying to make you believe in the artifice of it all. It's the wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Come on, just play along sort of aspect to it. Because to your point, yeah, he could solve all of his problems just by killing Bond and leaving him on the side of the road, or drugging him so that he doesn't remember any. Like leave him in a strip club somewhere, and then they're like, "Oh, he got drunk again," and it's all fine. But I think it's also, this is the point where Bond truly starts diverging from the books. Because in the books, they do horrific things to him. And they do these awful real world spy things to him. And it is the film's acknowledging from this point forward, we are in a Cold War. We are all worried about nuclear Armageddon. We are all worried about all of these sorts of things, and people aren't coming to the movies to remind themselves of it. They're coming to the movies to convince themselves that it's all going to work out and it's all okay. Escapism. And there are people, well, yeah, but there are people smarter and more capable than they are who are handling all of this. Because the horrific truth is that there are no people smarter or more capable than they are handling any of these problems. So Bond is a necessary escape valve at a crucial time for people to sort of just relax a little bit and say, okay, it's going to work out. It's going to be all right.
Yeah, it's interesting though what you said though, John, about the divergence from the books.
Yeah, I but the thing is, it's necessary because I think that's what makes the. I think it's what makes the, even though there are certain, I mean, obviously, culture changes, our attitude about certain things changes, and everything like that. I think it's what indulges us to forgive the films more than we might forgive the books, because there are definitely things in the books where you look at them, you're like, well, I can't really look the other way on this one. Like, I encourage anyone to read the novel Live and Let Die by Ian Fleming, because there is a chapter title where you look at it and you say, oh no, this is all sorts of wrong. I remember hitting that and like closing the book and saying, all right, I have to make a conscious decision right now that I understand this was written in a different time. But it's that departure from the books, that playfulness about everything else that makes you say, okay, this thing that I might not like that's happening right now, this is just how much has changed in 60 years. And
no, it's
for the
movie
better.
Bond, not book
Right.
Bond. Yeah.
Exactly.
So if only there was an internet back then, oh, how they would whine and complain about movie Bond and how different he is from the books and the source material.
I wonder though, because the books were popular.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly think that back then people were much more forgiving of saying, yeah, you're making an adaptation.
Or they just didn't have a
everything.
forum to talk on. I think that's a big piece of it. But
I honestly think that most people were willing to just say, oh, this was different in the book. This is what it was. And it was a point of conversation for people. I do, because people would see the movie and then they would go and they would talk about it and say, oh, this was different in the book. Was it? Yeah. Oh yeah. As opposed to somebody coming in and saying you changed a word and everything is therefore invalid and terrible.
right.
When you were talking about sensibilities and everything like that, like in the popularity of the book, you have to remember that like this book was, and this isn't an excuse, but like the book was written in the 50s and the movie was shown in the 60s. And one part of my dad showing me these movies was every once in a while pausing or just kind of leaning over and saying, hey, don't ever do that. Like, don't ever say that to a woman, like that kind of thing.
But right. I'm glad you said that, because that is the exact thing. Is this was, as part of that experience, we've all had that experience with our parents where we watch a film, or an older brother or an older sibling, sister, whatever, where they might say, yeah, that's not really, I still remember years and years ago, watching stuff on PBS with my dad, and it would say something like a Honeymooners or an Amos and Andrew would come up, Amos and Andy would come up, and my dad would be like, yeah, not so much anymore. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks more to, when we were shown these things, we were shown with sort of guides that would explain to us one-to-one, yeah, this isn't really a thing we do anymore. This isn't cool. Okay. But look at the rest of it and look at the things that do work for it.
That's well put, because, like there is misogyny in this movie. There is misogyny in the Bond franchise, especially early in the franchise. And you see it like really addressed once we get to Pierce Brosnan and forward. And I remember when he's getting a massage from Dink, and then he just like slaps her on the butt and says "man talk." Not only is that sound effect like 5 times too loud.
Yes, it is.
It's an absurd thing to include.
They use the cannon sound effect for like a shot.
Yes.
And this film won an Academy Award for sound effects.
Well, not that sound effect, but collectively maybe
Everything else.
Everything else.
Yeah.
Well,
Everything else.
I swear that bullet ricochet sound is the sound they use in like every Bond movie. Like in the video games, we all know that little like
It probably is.
yeah.
I mean, like,
I
they
know you
still
guys know the
use-
sound I'm talking about.
Oh,
It's in
yes.
your
I know
mind.
Yes, I
exactly
do.
what you're talking about.
You
I
say
mean,
ricochet, I know a sound in my head. It plays immediately. Yeah.
Also, this isn't in this one, but the Bond silencer effect totally
Oh, yeah.
lied to me and lied to an entire generation, multiple generations of people, of what a silencer sounds like.
Or what it actually does, or anything like
Yeah.
that. I mean, it's like a spoiler for anybody out there if you don't know. A silencer, it's not as quiet as you might think.
It's
it
got
is.
good
It
marketing, but it doesn't actually
Yeah.
do anything.
Yeah,
It hurts your ears a little less. That's what
Right,
a silencer
exactly.
does.
you can't quite pinpoint where the sound came from. That's maybe the benefit of it. And
Maybe.
but in a closed room, you're still going to know. But what's interesting though, as we're talking about that, like the way that the film is different from the book and different sensibilities and everything. What's interesting is in the teaser, he's still that sort of bastard Bond, where we would all reflect, where he sees the reflection of the guy in the woman's eyeball
Yeah.
and turns her around and is like, here, you take this potential concussive hit. And I'm not going to try to get out of the way. I'm just going to let you take the shot.
Yeah,
And
you
it's-
betrayed me. You are now dead to me. And
Right.
I do not care.
That's very much Book Bond. Book Bond is an awful person. He's a terrible guy. And what's fascinating is Fleming never tried to present him as a good person. Fleming presented him as that, I always forget his name, but Colonel Jessup, Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men. He's the guy you need on the wall because he's the awful person you don't want in polite society.
Yeah.
But you need to put him somewhere where he's going to do terrible things to protect you. And it's really, I just think really interesting, but because we're not quite what I think the template gets set here and everything. And yes, sensibilities change and all of that. And I think that's sort of what's going to be really interesting about looking at, for instance, Man with the Golden Gun, is I think by that point, by the 70s to 80s, that's the point at which Goldfinger, this template, allows that self-deprecating wink about, yeah, we know this is sort of silly sort of thing to take hold. And of course, with everything like that, it just goes a bit too far eventually, which I know that we'll talk about with For Your Eyes Only as well. But setting the template, I think this gives Bond the ability as a film franchise to stick with a formula while at the same time evolving to embrace where the audience is at a given moment.
Yeah, it becomes the rule.
One thing I do want to talk about is Guy Hamilton's his contributions to the movie that we now deem like either iconic or a great idea. You know, like as we talked about, it was Guy Hamilton's idea to change it to irradiating the gold instead of trying to take it out, which is such a great idea. It's just a genius idea to begin with, even from a villain standpoint.
You've been thinking a little too much about how to steal gold, Guy Hamilton. Are you sure?
Yeah. It was in the book. It was a buzzsaw that was going to chop him in half, but Guy Hamilton's like, "Nah, that's been done to death. That's lame. Let's make it a laser, and then we'll use the laser later on." And then it was also his idea to add the ejector seat to the Aston Martin.
You must be
iconic.
And that's the thing, is that like it's just, and also I think it was his idea to give John Barry full range and full control over the score. And you're just
All
like
good
you
decisions.
look at all of those decisions, and you're like, God bless Guy Hamilton. And I feel like we wouldn't have had the franchise we have if it wasn't for Guy Hamilton. I truly believe that.
But to speak to that point, I agree with you, and it's because Guy Hamilton, you talk about giving bury the reins on the score, but also updating things and saying the audience wants something cooler, and also giving his director of photography the ability to say, okay, make this look good. And there are so many moments in this film that
there's some beautiful shots.
Great. Not just the way they're framed, though, the color, the way that he calls attention to characters, the way that the cars are colored, the way that the green of the racing field stands against Bond's gray suit, that sort of thing, where it's like, this is masterwork level stuff. And that is a director where, look, let's be honest. A director can be an auteur, yes, but a director at the end of the day has to be somebody who is a great leader, who brings the best out of the people who are working with him. And that, this has just been a long way to support your point, Tristan, that Guy Hamilton is a director who recognized the strengths of everybody working with him and said, I'm not going to micromanage you. I'm going to let you do you. I'm going to make sure that I get these shots, I get this stuff, I work with the editor, and we put it together, and I'm going to lead the team to what needs to be done. And because I mentioned the director of photography, I consider it no small amount of irony that Ted Moore, the cinematographer, shot a film called No Time to Die in 1958, which later was the title of a Bond film, which I think is, there's a beautiful sort of symmetry to that sort of thing.
Well, and I also have to give it to Guy, because it would also be kind of intimidating, where the first two Bond films before this were both directed by Terrence Young. So you now have, there are people in the populace who are like, oh, well, if you're seeing Bond, it's Sean Connery and Terrence Young. Like that's what makes a Bond movie. And here comes a new director. And not only do you have to kind of reinvent Bond for your take on him, because again, now we look back and we're like, oh yeah, well, who knows who Bond's going to be next, and who knows who's going to direct next? Like, that's the formula, but this is the beginning of the formula.
And I do believe, and listeners, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was Guy Hamilton's idea to go lighter, to take the source material of Goldfinger and look at Dr. No and look at From Russia with Love and not go so geopolitical with it. I do believe that was his idea.
I mean, Bond's a fun character. Why not have fun with
him? And what also I want to give Guy Hamilton credit for is what he said no to. Is the doctor. There was the shaving scene in the private jet where the stewardess is peeking in on him. That was supposed to be one big Gillette commercial. And Hamilton's like, I think on set just went, no. It's like,
give them their money back. We're done.
That's stupid. Like, essentially it's just like, well, we don't get that money. He's like, well, then we don't get that money. He's like, that's ridiculous. And also, the flying circus towards the end, they were instructed to not fly below 3,000 feet, and the cinematographer, the producers, and everybody was just like, that's useless. That's useless for us. That's not going to work.
Yeah.
And Hamilton said, okay, well then don't do it. And so they just flew under 500 feet.
Which is so low.
And the military, I quote, went ape.
But hey, that's definitely a better to ask for forgiveness than for permission kind of thing.
But he got the shot. He got the shots.
Oh, and watching it, you're like, they're literally flying over no special effects. They are flying over Fort Knox.
Like, you can't gas somebody from 3,000 feet in this way, like in this time.
I would argue that even at 500 feet, because of the way that, I mean, look, I'm going to qualify this as saying I'm no scientist. Okay, that's fair. But I would also look at this and be like, do you know the concentration of parts per million that gas would have to be to have that effect even from 500 feet?
Yes. But imagine it from 3,000 feet.
Oh yeah, from 3,000 feet. If you like a squirrel passed out, sure.
Yeah.
But
I'm just picturing the shot like you put it really low and right next to the Fort Knox building so you can kind of remotely tell where you are, and you're looking up and you see 5 little triangles moving.
Yeah.
And then they intercut with like the gas coming out, and then you cut back and they're just still flying way up there. Yeah, it wouldn't have worked. It really wouldn't have.
I still love, and again, this is another thing about the staging that I think Guy Hamilton deserves credit for, is just that reveal of Felix Leiter being a plant to convince them that the gas had worked on everybody.
Yes.
So that they could
double
wake up.
shot. Yeah, that was
just absolutely brilliantly done.
Well, I think we've gushed about Guy a bunch. I do want to make sure we talk a bit about John Barry, the music. I mean, I think he'd done like 11 Bond movies in total by the time he was done. So again, we're trying to change the formula, but we still keep a lot of the main pieces. I love the music in this movie, the sweeping strings and the exotic locales. I mean, not just to mention the title song, I mean, is one of the best Bond openers right there.
Oh my gosh, yes.
If not the best. I mean, it's probably just a matter of semantic, 1 or 2 degrees. I would go half stars if I had to vote, if I needed to get that.
Goldfinger is in the conversation, but nothing will ever top The Living Daylights by Aha. But we'll save that for a later conversation.
I love that song.
That'll be our follow-up episode, ranking all of the intros from the 6 films we watch.
I'm
now,
on
John,
board.
I sent you a John Barry album one time, a long time ago, and I just sent you a link. I didn't mail it to you.
I'm like, sure. Like an LP in the mail, or like, how did this arrive?
I texted you a link so that you could listen to a John Barry album, and I was like, you need to listen to this. This is like the forgotten Bond film. And it's not like, oh, he only knows how to do one thing. It's like, no, John Barry shaped Bond.
Oh,
like,
yes.
The musical notes that we hear in our head, not just the theme, but just the, like what we think of Bond when we hear musical, like motifs and him entering in a dangerous room or a villain appearing. Like John Barry shaped that. And so there is much John Barry in Bond as there is Sean Connery, I'd say.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There is one piece of Bond music that haunts my nightmares because I can't stand it. We'll get to that later in this series, but absolutely. John Barry has as much to do with Bond's imprint on culture as anybody else does. And what I think is interesting, what I think is worth pointing out about that, I'll tack on to that as saying that while the directors change, Barry is the glue that sort of holds them together. Because not the only one, obviously, but Barry is one of those pieces where you can't replace him. Like you can replace it's the ship of Theseus. How much of the ship can you replace until it's no longer the same ship? And I would say that John Barry is that framework that everybody else works around up to a certain point, because obviously, he stops working.
That's true. I mean, you change, directors, you change actors, but John Barry stays. That's your consistency.
So long as that music is still there, it's like, okay, I know I'm watching a James Bond film.
Okay, I want to talk about Machine Gun Headlights. Because before we wrap up on Goldfinger, I love this. I mean, this car is like the Bond car. It's like the first one that gets all the gadgets, which he actually uses a bunch of them. I still didn't quite understand why, if he has bulletproof glass, he needs a bulletproof shield to pop up. That's like double bulletproof, maybe. That didn't quite make sense to me. But
to me, it was always, once it gets so shot up that you can't even see out of it, you run the risk of it actually coming out. And so just pull up the extra layer since you can't see out of it anymore.
That's true. That's true.
Well, I know at the Spy Museum in Washington, D.C., they had for a time, I don't know if they still have it, but they had a model of that Aston Martin, and they talked about how, intelligence agents, CIA would watch a Bond film and they would say, okay, how could we possibly really do this?
Right.
Like they would look at it for
like
inspiration.
oil slick coming out of a car isn't a terrible idea if you're trying to get away. It's just,
Right.
It's not obviously something that every car has. Like this is still not full on fantasy yet. Like pretty much, I mean, obviously the technology for the tracer wasn't really there, but most of the other things the car does are practical. And you technically could put in a car. I think Mythbusters did a couple times, like the ejector seat and the rotating license plate cover was always a charm.
I always thought that was a real thing because I know that
that's why the British plates are so long and thin, so you can do that. I'm sure that's the design scope.
But like it's such a simple idea. I can imagine somebody sitting there who works in one of these intelligence agencies who sees Goldfinger and goes, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, we could do that, couldn't we?
No, yeah. And, it's not watch lasers or other crazy things yet, but it's just, it's well set up. And it's kind of also the promise. Like, we know watching that Q scene is we're going to see this stuff in action. There's no reason to not talk about it if we're not going to see it. So it's again, part of that setup, like the laser that we're going to see pay off even more later.
It's that Bond formula that from here on out that we get for most of the time. And it's not a surprise. The gadgets aren't a surprise. The surprise is how he uses it.
Yes.
Like in what situation he uses it and how he evades the villains.
Although I have to say that they do get more and more ridiculous. And I have to say that one of the things I most enjoy about Bond films is that Q segment, because that was, it was almost as if they would sit in the writer's room waiting for the moment where they could have the day where they thought up the things that Q was demonstrating. Including the things that Bond would not use.
Yes, the background element,
the background stuff.
Yeah, the background was the first to go full crazy. Like,
yes,
someone gets in a phone booth and it fills with expanding foam or something crazy. Like that's the stuff you're not going to actually see in the movie. It's just crazy. Or the ghetto blaster.
These are insane. But even that is like that. Even that is so weird because the term ghetto blaster was an actual slang term for a giant boombox. That boombox and ghetto blaster were interchangeable terms back then. But yes, like the stuff that's going on in the background is like their showcase of insane ideas they came up with that they couldn't work into the film. Where you can almost watch them and say,
put that on sheet number 2. Okay.
Right.
Well, that's just crazy. Sheet number 2. Okay. Sheet number 1. We can actually use that.
Well, but you look at it and you say, I almost want to see the movie where they did work that in. Because boy, what a movie.
Some crazy villain tries to break into Q Branch and they just go whole hog on that person with everything. They're like, oh, it's just a normal room with a sofa. Well, that sofa can turn into whatever and, take you out.
Explosive sofa, a Q Branch story. There you go. I got a connected universe thing going on for you.
I hope that now that Daniel Craig's done, and because Daniel Craig era Bond, they definitely shied away from gadgets.
They did.
Yeah. And he was in an interview and said Austin Powers effed us, but he didn't say F. Because of Austin Powers in the late 90s parodying all those gadgets, in Casino Royale, they completely moved away from it. They're like, it's too cheesy, we can't do it anymore. Which I would hope say that with this new one, they find a happy medium between Goldfinger and Die Another Day.
Yes.
Yeah.
Agree. Yes.
Because I would say the gadgets jumped over to the Mission Impossible franchise, where they use them
yes.
a lot,
Yes.
but not in a crazy way. Like, they're really cool, and it's like just on the cutting edge of, I could see how you could make that, but obviously that's not really a thing.
Ethan Hunt is very much the American James Bond.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree.
And God bless him for it.
And his crazy stunts.
Yes.
All right, gentlemen, I think we've gone around, and this is a great establishment for the Wing of Bond, as next week we're going to be talking about the man with the golden gun, keeping our director with Guy Hamilton, but we're going to move on to Roger Moore, and that's going to be really interesting. But before we get there, I want to hear your ranking, John Mills, for Goldfinger. I think I know, but I need to hear you say it.
This film is like Citizen Kane. I have to give it the rating for what it accomplished as much as how much I enjoy it. I also have to acknowledge, as I said at the beginning of this recording, that this is the film that all acknowledgement to Sean Eastridge, who, if he's listening to this, he has to send me a personal text message acknowledging that he did. This is the film that does lock it in. If you can go in for Goldfinger, you're going to be a Bond fan. And this film is the one where I watched it and I said, yep, I'm on board for the entire ride. I can do this. It's not just Bond. Goldfinger establishes what every action movie is going to be for decades afterward. Because they look at it and they say, this is how we do it. We might not have Q Branch, but this is how you're going to do an adventure movie for everybody to watch and enjoy. I have to give it 5 stars. It doesn't even have to do with whether I like it 5 stars level. I have to acknowledge what it accomplished, what Guy Hamilton did in figuring out what worked for Bond. It's a 5-star movie for me.
I couldn't say it better. And Tristan, are you going to follow in John's footsteps, or is the pacing a little off in this film?
Damn it.
Uh-oh. Oh, no.
It's like you know me.
Oh, for Pete's sake.
For 100 episodes.
There we go.
Yes, the pacing is off. Like, yes, like that's the thing, is that like, but I have to echo everything that John just said, is that you have to look at it from the time period when it was made, the sensibilities in which it was made for, and what it's set up. And like I said earlier, Goldfinger is what made me fall in love with Bond. Goldfinger is what made everybody fall in love with Bond who wasn't already in love with it because of Dr. No and From Russia with Love. And it established the formula for what we would love for decades. And even outside of the series, like John was talking about. And so while I know that the pacing is odd, and if it was made today, the shaving scene wouldn't be in there, and the car crushing scene wouldn't be in there.
Yep.
Because like there's a few times in there where you're just like, good, why couldn't they just off them?
The action just stops.
Like it grinds the movie to a halt.
Yep.
And it's things like that where normally I would take off like a half star for that kind of thing, maybe even a full star if the rest of it wasn't so good. And that's something that John often talks about, is if you find something wrong with a film, but yet the other stuff around it is so good it makes up for it, you can forgive it. And that's definitely what I'm doing with Goldfinger. And so for all of the reasons that we talked about, this is a 5-star film. This could be the best Bond film ever made. And if it's not, it's definitely an argument to be made.
It is an argument to be made. I'll tell you all after we're done with all these what the actual best Bond film is.
Oh, okay. I guess somebody doesn't have to go to sleep for tonight. Yeah. Again, I can't. It's so funny how, actually thinking about it, it's like the first negative thing we've really said about it was the pacing, and it was at the very end because we had nothing but great things to say about this movie. And I won't get into the debate of best Bond movie because, it's just like any other film. What do I want to watch tonight? That is affecting by how much time I have, the mood I'm in, what I'm interested, how recently I watched it. So it's so subjective. It's crazy. But what we can't deny is this becoming the template, this becoming what Bond would be for the next decade. And I think allowed this franchise to be the flexible franchise it is, where you change directors and you even change main actors. Like, there are few franchises that can survive the main actor changing from this iconic character. And apparently, as long as you just keep Q aging to a gray old man at the end, then it all works out. But no, this was a lot of fun. Really, really interesting just to re-review it. It had been a little while since I'd seen it recently. And so while I obviously remembered the high points, I didn't remember the exact plot. So it was fun to kind of reabsorb that. I'm debating because my wife has told me she has never seen a Bond movie. And it's just not her thing, which is totally fine. It doesn't have to be. But if I ever get the opportunity of like, fine, you can show me one Bond, I think I know which one is going to be on the docket. I'm not going to make my Star Trek 5 mistake. That was so dumb. Past Darren. But yes, but 5. Give it a 5 for sure. It's a fun film. It's a fun film to watch. It's and smart villain. I love me a smart villain. Not that the villain has to win. Not that they have to turn good at the end. I don't care. I love a villain that is on par, at least, with your protagonist. Because if they're not, then they're not a threat. And Goldfinger was a threat. And Goldfinger practically won. Like, he almost got away with it. Even again, when he showed up at the plate at the very, very, very end. And yeah, obviously taking a gun into a plane is not the smartest idea, but
yes, that's true.
But a great film, tons of great things. If we weren't moving on to other Bond films, I'd probably just watch it again. But I need to leave space for next week when we're going to be covering The Man with the Golden Gun in 1974. Roger Moore will take the stage, and again with Guy Hamilton. So we'll get to compare and contrast these two films by this great director. Come tune again next week for 007 Wing of Bond here on Houselights.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.